Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most credible voice in true crime. Happy 4th of July, everybody. I hope you're having a good time wherever you are in the world. It's a crazy time of the year. This year, in 2020, compared to last year and all the years before, really strange things going on. But wherever you are, I hope you've had a good 4th of July. Interestingly, on this day, 2 years ago, Shanann Watts sort of had her 4th of July hopes dashed. She was in Aberdeen. She was hoping to join the sort of fireworks that were supposed to take place there, and then the day itself rained out. So 2 years ago today, there's a picture of Shanann looking actually quite beautiful. Her face is very kind of shining, and behind her you can kind of see that it's raining. And she posted 2 years ago, so much for 20% of rain, no fireworks for us tonight. There would be for Chris Watts in Colorado. And let's now go to the phone data review. There's a kind of a brief mention of just two little entries, one at 0856. Watts called Shanann and had a 19-minute conversation with her. That is definitely one aspect of the case that we know very little about, unfortunately. We know about the texts, we know about a lot of the forensic information, we know what Kissinger said about this person, we know all that kind of thing. We don't know what they said, what they actually said to each other. There's very little discussion, even when Chris Watts was questioned. What is this conversation about? What is that conversation about? And so we don't really get an authentic sense of what was it really like between them when they were talking, for example, for 19 minutes. Was it, who did most of the talking? What did they talk about? Did they ever talk about finances? Did the one sound irritable? Did the one ask the other to do a lot of things? What was going on? And that's in one conversation. How did the conversations line up, and what sort of pattern sort of developed in that? That's definitely one aspect that is unfortunately missing. We don't have, can you imagine if we had the audio of a couple of conversations that they had, long conversations that they had? So that's the one entry. Interestingly, Watts called Shanann that day. It's not the other way around. And then at the end of the evening, 22:44, Watts watched the Independence Day fireworks with Nick and Amanda Thayer in Thornton. And the phone data reviewer, I guess, knew this or suspected this because his phone connected to their router. This is something that I know when I studied the phone data review, I thought we were going to get incredible information on Watts' movements because, every time his phone connects to a router, that's sort of telling you where he is, right? Also, when he's arriving home and so on. And yet you don't really have that kind of information. Every now and then, the phone data review seems to say, okay, the phone connect to the router. We don't know whether that information was removed or whether the reviewer just decided, well, he's not going to refer to it all the time, because one can imagine there was a heck of a lot of metadata that was more or less relevant, if that makes sense. Now, what's interesting is if one only sticks to the phone data review, you sort of just only pay attention to that, you only get one dimension of the story, and it's not a bad dimension. It's quite a complete dimension. It's also a very accurate dimension of what's going on. So even if you do just stick to the sort of one track of the phone data review, you're getting the authentic story of what happened, what was sent when, and even though a lot of it is missing, all of that is what they said, what they did, not what someone else is saying or whatever. And in this respect, a very important aspect is timing. When does this happen? When does that happen? And so in that respect, I just want to highlight something, and that is on July 4th, they actually have an argument. Chris Watts and Kissinger. That's very early to be having kind of an argument. I'll tell you about what it is in a moment, but the fact that this happens as early as July 4th does, I think, indicate that, you know, they were definitely ensconced in something in June, to be having not only the argument that they had, but already kind of a couple having an argument. I'm not saying it was all over between them. It wasn't that kind of argument, but it was a kind of a lover's tiff. So for Shanann, it rained in Aberdeen, and for Chris Watts, he had an argument with his mistress. But just bear in mind that this July 4th is just barely a week after he's coming back from San Diego. So I really do think things were already heating up in June. And so when he went with Shanann to San Diego, I think he was missing her already, and he was already starting to separate from Shanann in his heart and in his mind. And, you know, if you take away the San Diego trip, you know, and you just have Chris Watts with Kissinger, it's not a true test of how much he loves Kissinger. The true test is when he's separated from her, what does that feel like? Also, when he's with Shanann, how does that feel like? Like, in other words, is he thinking, yes, I could continue having an affair, you know, I will sort of have my bread buttered on both sides, I'll be married and I'll have an affair. And I think when he was in San Diego, I think he sort of felt, I don't really want to be here at all. I don't really want to be with this person. I don't want this. I don't want to continue doing this. I'd rather be there with her. And so when you kind of had, bear in mind, Chris Watts didn't go with Shanann to Arizona. He went with her on quite a few trips. He didn't go with her on that last trip. I don't know if he was ever scheduled to, but it is interesting how I think after the San Diego trip, I think he and then Shanann left again. I think those final 5 weeks, I think he felt like I can't give this up. I can't go back to the life that I had before. And of course he didn't. But then neither did Shanann because of him. So the point I wanted to make earlier was just that if you look at the Chris Watts case one-dimensionally through the phone data review, and we do need to do that, and I have done that, and I will post a link to the Crime Rocket 2 entries for, these were blog posts for 1 year ago today, CW, and so obviously they aren't on YouTube. I'm doing them as hashtag 2 years ago today CW on YouTube, but from now on I can kind of read through what I posted on Crime Rocket 2. You can obviously go and read them there yourself if you like. But the point I want to make is you kind of have at least three dimensions that you can weave together the narrative, which is what I did in my books. That is even more sort of giving you all facets. So the one essential is the phone data review. The second strand in that sort of rope or narrative thread is the social media, being Instagram, but especially Shanann's Facebook. That's giving you photos and a couple of comments from Shanann. 90% of that's just thrive. But some of it is providing pictures and color to what we know, and sometimes a little bit of detail, timestamp detail, where she is, what she's doing. It's hard to know what she's really feeling because I don't think she's not on Facebook to say necessarily what she's really feeling personally and privately. It's more about showing Thrivers what Thrive does for her, but it's still in conjunction with the phone data review. It's quite interesting. For example, it's interesting to see the photo of Shanann's face on July 4th, knowing what was going on July 4th. If you just stick to the phone data review, you're not going to know what actually happened on that day, behind the scenes. It's not just, July 4th wasn't just Watts calling Shanann and speaking to her for 90 minutes, and then at the end of the day watching the Independence Day fireworks with Nick and Amanda Thayer. That wasn't the whole day for him. There were the hours between. And so when you go to the discovery, and that's the third dimension, then you get the an almost complete picture of what is going on, because there you're getting Kissinger talking about it, Watts himself talking about it, some of Shanann's friends also talking about some important milestones on the timeline. So when we go to the discovery, and this is, I'm not quite sure which page it is. It says page 16, but it's not. I think this is page 16 of the CBI report. So the second confession made in February from Dodge Correctional, when he's asked by Tammy Lee, did he and Kissinger ever fight? So it was a question was just asked sort of almost out of the blue, did you ever fight? And Watts answered, they never fought, but he had to calm Kissinger down a few times. And then when he refers to that, when he gives an example, it's the 4th of July, 2 years ago today. So on this particular day, they had a rare disagreement. And the disagreement was that she didn't want to be second. Now, she's already feeling this on July 4th. And she may have already been feeling it when Watts went with Shanann to San Diego. So in other words, that persistent nagging feeling of, well, I want you all to myself. And then on July 4th, he had that 19-minute conversation. And this is where, as I say, it adds another dimension to it, is you say, well, at 08:56, when he had that 90-minute conversation, who did he have it with? Sorry, not who. Where did he have that conversation? And I think the answer is from Kissinger's home. I think she was in the shower, and then he spoke to Shanann for quite a long time, and then anyway, we'll go to that. So in the discovery, from the second discovery from the CBI report, it says Kissinger got upset when she realized she would always be the other person, and he, Watts, would always put his wife first. The first incident where Kissinger realized he put his wife first was when he left her house on July 4th, 2018. He told Kissinger just because he had to leave didn't mean she needed to take a step back. Kissinger told him she thought it was better they didn't see each other the rest of the day. Kissinger ended up asking him to come over after she returned from a baseball game, and he went to her house. So one wonders, did he go to her house after watching the fireworks at the Thayers? In other words, pretty late at night. And did he spend the night of July 4th at her home? And it looks like he did. So what is also interesting here is, the way I understand this, he was at her home, so having slept the night of July 3rd at her home. July 4th, he, I think, made the call to Shanann, and then realized he needed to leave, either because of the length of the call or because of what Shanann was saying to him, or because Kissinger was upset, that he was talking to his wife. And bear in mind that July 4th is also the day Kissinger goes to Watts's house, right? And what this suggests is he's at her house. They sort of argue over almost a phone call. Then he goes home because she sort of sends him home. And then doesn't she go to his home and sort of try to make peace or talk to him again? We've got to be careful not confusing July 4th and July 14th, but she does mention that she went to his home to talk about diet plans. And in the transcript for, I think it's August 21st, in her transcript with Kobach, I say this under correction, but I'm pretty sure she says when she went to his house the first time, just to talk about diet plans. Now, that's possible that it was, but it's I think it's a little bit unlikely, given what happened on July 4th. And then there's also Deetergate that happened. I'm just a little bit unsure right at this moment whether Deetergate happened on the 4th or the 14th. Okay, so Deetergate was the 14th, which is when Kissinger went to Watts's home and she apparently saw all the photos, and there was another sort of moment, another argument. Seems like both times she went to his house, they argued. And I do think that that's something worth considering is, did she go to his house after they'd argued at her house? So she sort of went to him to make peace. And what would that making peace have involved in his home? Just something to think about. We don't know, I'm just speculating. So I'm going to put the post dealing with Deetergate in the description to this episode, alongside the one dealing with the 4th of July, just so that you have them side by side. What potentially gives some substance to what Kissinger said about giving Watts diet advice or fitness advice, I'm not saying that she didn't. I'm pretty sure they did have that in common. They did talk about that. I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if it's necessarily so that that's what they spoke about on July 4th, or that that's what they spoke about when she went to his home. I mean, it's an innocent thing that they could have spoken about, but why couldn't they have spoken about that on any other day? Why speak about that at his home, kind of thing? Anyway, elsewhere in the discovery, there's the reference to Chris losing 13 pounds between July 4th and August 11th. Now, it's interesting that it's specifically between July 4th, right? July 4th to August 11th is a month and a week, so after 5 weeks. So I don't know whether there was some kind of program that she set out, a 5-week program. If there is, it would be good to see it, some kind of log or app or something like that where you measure your results over a 5-week period. In any event, also from the discovery, it says, on July 4th, Nicole went to Chris's home in Frederick to help Chris set up his diet and weight loss exercise goals. Nicole said this was the first time she was at Chris's home. After spending time at Chris's home on July 4th, Nicole went to the Colorado Rockies baseball game without Chris. And then it says the second and final time she went to Chris's home was on July 14th, 2018. So what is quite interesting in the discovery is there's no admission. I'm talking about this section of the discovery. There's no admission here that there was any kind of argument. I think this is where Kessinger's statements to the authorities was sort of summarized, and on this particular occasion she was basically just saying, well, I went to his house on that day and on that day, and I went to give him sort of diet advice. And yet you sort of have this other story of Kessinger getting upset on July the 4th. Now, do you think she would go to give him diet advice if she was upset? I mean, do you think she'd be talking about diet and that kind of thing if she was upset? If she was upset about being second? There is a fourth dimension to what we know about the timeline, and we get that from letters from Christopher, and there is a reference in that book to July 4th, and this is apparently what's said, what's accounted for in yet another version of, just giving yet another amount of detail, dimension, perspective on what we thought we knew. And so what he told Cheryl and Cadel was that he stayed the night at Nikki's, meaning on July 3rd, that he was off work on July 4th, and that he slept in late the next morning. Now, bear in mind, he would normally be up at, say, 4 or 5, 6 o'clock at the latest, normally, and his call to Shanann was actually at almost 9 o'clock. So it was fairly early in the day, but based on what time he would normally be up, it was actually quite late. When he was up and checked his phone, there were many missed calls from Shanann, and he knew she was going to be really upset because he hadn't been sort of at her beck and call. And so he went outside. This is in the Cheryl and Cadel narrative. He went outside Nikki's apartment to call Shanann. So while he's there, and then it says she was beyond pissed, absolutely furious. He decided to go home for the rest of the day. He went back inside to let Nikki know. Now, I don't know whether this is very well written because it's a little bit confusing. Who was pissed? Who was absolutely furious? Was it Nicole Kessinger or Shanann? And then, him deciding to go home for the rest of the day, was it because Kessinger or Shanann was furious? And the way I understand it, I think it is Shanann who was, to use his words, beyond pissed, absolutely furious that he'd not responded to all the calls Shanann had made, I guess, that morning. So Shanann had called him. He's kind of with his mistress. He's either having sex with her or he's asleep, and Shanann's trying to call him. And Shanann's assuming he's at home, or she may also have assumed that he's at work. Why is he not checking his phone? Or why is he not checking his phone earlier? What is he doing? Why is he so distracted? And Shanann was actually totally justified in being furious. And that was actually a moment for her to nail him down and say, what the F is going on with you? And obviously he could just sort of pass the whole thing off as, his phone battery died or whatever excuse he could think of. But Shanann's anger was absolutely justified. Had she only known what was actually going on, imagine how furious she would have been then. That's the other side, is what's missing calls from Shanann could make her absolutely furious. How furious would she be if she knew what was really going on? And isn't that why he kept it a secret from her? Isn't that why he couldn't it was like walking into a fire, voluntarily. Do you want to do that? Do you want to get scorched? You're responsible for something, but do you want to, take the blame? And he didn't. And so, because of the, I guess, lambasting he got, he wanted to just go home for the rest of the day. It wasn't as if Nicole said, "Can you go home?" He decided to go home. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure whether it was to feed the dog or Shanann had given him instructions or whatever. But for whatever reason, he felt, well, this is bad. And maybe he went home because he wanted to make sure it didn't get worse with Shanann, and he could pay a little bit of attention to Shanann to get him off her off his back, and then he could go back to Nicole. But that decision making wasn't very it didn't go down very well with Nicole. So after he decided to go home, after that 90-minute conversation, so that 90-minute conversation, I said earlier, it would be amazing to know what was said in those conversations. What was the tone? What sort of words did they use with one another? Was the one sort of quiet and the other one bristling? But what kind of vocabulary did they use? And this is giving us a little bit of possibly a hint at what that would have been like. And so it seems like it was a long rant from Shanann, what's going on and what's quietly trying to explain, and then ultimately being so intimidated that he just wanted to go home, even though he'd taken the day off. And think about how disappointing that had to be for Kessinger. She wants to spend this important day with her boyfriend, and he's now going home. Even his wife's not even home, but he wants to go home. And so when he lets Nikki know, Nikki gets angry, and now he's sort of dealing with the prospect of both women. I'm just talking about beyond this particular altercation. This would have educated him on also whose anger do you want to deal with in the future. In other words, which woman do you want to be with ultimately and deal with that person's anger long term, and also how are you going to deal with the other one's anger if you make whichever choice. So that makes sense. In any event, Nicole now gets angry, and it's possible that they were going to do something later on in the day. I don't know if they were going to go to the baseball game or if they're going to watch fireworks, but one can anticipate that they were going to have some kind of special day together. And Chris Watts said no, or maybe they didn't have something planned, but maybe she sort of said, well, aren't we going to do something together? And Watts said no, he's just going to go home for the day. And that is the day that Kessinger went to his home. Do you really think she went there to just for to give him diet plans? She may have gone there to soothe him and to say sorry or whatever. And maybe she did think afterwards, well, can I come over? We'll talk about the diet plans. Maybe that was part of it. But certainly there's another side to that story. And what is quite interesting on July 4th is, as early as that, as early as, if you believe it was around about 6 to 8 week affair, then as early as week 3 to 5, she's feeling like she's not number one in his life. And that's quite a big deal. Shanann's not around, and Watts is sort of kowtowing to her, to his wife. But Shanann's not around, so she wouldn't really know if he's at Saratoga Trail or not, or would she? Did she know? Did she suspect he wasn't there? something going on with the alarm, or the alarm's not on, and Shanann's just getting upset. Anyway, Kessinger's feeling like she's not number one, and this is upsetting her. And this is kind of very early, about a month and a week before the murders, but it's time enough for Watts to start thinking, who does he want to be number one? And ultimately Kessinger became totally number one in his life. Number one above Shanann, number one above the child that was going to be born, and number one above his own children. So she became absolutely number one. And one could say that the murders were meant to either bring about her becoming number one, right, or proving to himself that she was number one, if that makes sense. But basically, by wiping out his entire family, there was no other option but for Kessinger to be number one in sort of numbers, like, because there's no one left. Obviously, from Kessinger's perspective, that wasn't really what she meant. I don't think she meant like, I need your family gone so that I can be number one. She basically just meant, I need to be reassured that I'm the most important person to you, or that I'm more important than your wife, or whatever. So this was like a crisis that happened on July 4th. And I think a useful way to remember it is just to think of fireworks, 4th of July fireworks, and then there were fireworks from Shanann, and there were fireworks from Kessinger, right? Both women sort of angry with Chris Watts, and it's quite ironic when you look at the picture of Shanann. She looks really happy in that picture, and yet we know what is actually going on in the background. Sherilyn Cadle's narrative goes on to say Watts may have been having second thoughts about the affair, like, am I going to be able to pull this off? Am I going to be able to keep this woman happy, Kessinger? Am I going to be able to not keep Shanann happy, but keep Shanann in the dark? And, this is where I think people don't know Chris Watts very well. He's an introvert. He's not very good with people. He's quite reserved. And at this point, he's kind of like, in the same way he threw the towel on his own trial, his own murder trial, took the plea deal really early on, he's also thinking about doing the same here, throwing in the towel on the affair because of this argument with Shanann. And you can make of this what you will, but in the narrative, in what said to Cadle, he said something along the lines that had Kessinger left him alone for the rest of that particular day, he may have turned around. Now, I think what that means is he may have decided, I'm not going to carry on with this affair, it's just too dangerous. Shanann may have reminded him of certain obligations in terms of finances, and have you paid this, and all sorts of other things, and even maybe what he needs to do on behalf of his children or whatever. And then, maybe realize, jeepers, I do need to go and do those things. I can't be on this sort of roller coaster ride. In other words, he was feeling duty bound to get off the roller coaster ride. But then when Kessinger sort of came after him or saw him at his home, then he decided to get back onto the roller coaster, and we know what ultimately happened. So Cadle writes, had she left him alone for the rest of that day, he may have turned around. It's quite interesting. Okay, and then later on, she showed up at Christopher's house. This is what Cadle writes, quote, with the ruse, she wanted to help him build a healthy protein diet plan. So what's the story is that she sort of, it's almost as if he's saying that she was kind of manipulative they'd argued, and then she kind of arrived at his house unannounced. That's how it seems. And told him, I want to help you with your diet plan. This is on July 4th. And then the description of this whole episode ends where Cadel writes, she didn't look around the house much that day. In other words, Kissinger didn't look around the house much that day. Why not? If they weren't looking around the house, and this is the first time she's in his house, what are they doing? And maybe that she said, well, let's talk about your diet. Maybe they did for 5 or 10 minutes and then did other things. And so there's kind of a very interesting dimension here where this is also in Cadel's book, where she says that Kissinger had felt that she couldn't leave Watts alone. So even though it seems like she sent Watts wanted to go home, but Kissinger also got really angry with him. After Watts left, it seems as if Kissinger sort of felt like if he's left alone in his house with all the memories and pictures of his family. Now bear in mind, she's not supposed to know about the pictures of the family on that trip, but it nevertheless comes up. He might decide his life was too good and give her up. So while he's away from her, Kissinger kind of feels, I guess, insecure, despite being angry, despite bristling, despite feeling second best. While Watts is away, she kind of gets, I guess, paranoid and is thinking about what's going on, and then goes over to him to deal with her, I guess, insecurities. And all of this is dealt with on page 34 of Cadel's book. She says maybe there was a deep love inside of him for his family that could be brought to the surface again, and Kissinger was worried that could happen. So Kissinger did seem to have Watts on a leash, but she also put Watts on a leash. She didn't want to let him go too much because she felt she wouldn't get him back again. So it's quite an interesting dimension that you see from that. Now, all of this has come from looking at July 4th and just saying, well, what else do we know? It's not like we don't know this information. It's just getting a more complete picture. And can you see what a complete picture it is compared to those 2 lines of kind of like code in the phone data review? It's just a harmless, Watts speaks to his wife for 19 minutes, and then at the end he goes to the Thayers. If you just looked at that on its own, you'd say, well, there's nothing about an affair. Did he actually even see Kissinger that day? Absolutely, and a lot happened. And that's how you fill that gaping hole, is by looking contextually at the relevant stuff in other materials. And there's so many dimensions, and that is what makes a chronological review quite interesting. Is every time you do it, you get more information, more context, a much richer impression. Okay, and so that has been around about 40 minutes. I think that's good enough for now. I'll be back tomorrow, continuing the phone data review from July 5th. I'll also be doing another episode in the hashtag 130 years ago today Van Gogh review. So the same kind of thing I've been doing with this timeline, I'm also doing with another timeline that also ends in a murder. So you might want to check that out if you haven't already. These videos seem to get thousands of views, and the Van Goghs only a couple of hundred. But the people who are watching them say they find it very addictive, very interesting. So if you know anything about Van Gogh, you might want to give some of those a listen. once again, wherever you are in the world, and if you're in America, I hope you're having a wonderful 4th of July. I hope if there are fireworks that they are fireworks of fun and celebration. I've had a pretty amazing day myself. I went to a friend's farm. We barbecued. I was able to take my dog out and just sort of sit out in nature. Absolute stillness. A beautiful, beautiful winter's day here in South Africa. Also, just a really nice, outing. So I hope whatever you did today was enjoyable. Before I sign off, I want to welcome the last 100 or so subscribers since I last thanked you guys for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Ring the bell for notifications of future content. There's still going to be quite a lot of episodes in this series, so if you want to catch them, ring the bell, like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.